So this is, in fact, the last of 20 lectures. And I can't believe it. It seems like just the beginning. I think we should have another 20 lectures. I'll just stay for another week on entirely new stuff. That would just be great. It seems as if we're just beginning, but in fact, we must come back to the C major of this life and recognize reality. It is the last lecture. So there are some things that we need to wrap up. One of these is we have to thank our hosts, of course. We're very pleased that Beihang University, the Beijing Language and Culture University, the Beijing Forestry University, Peking University, and of course, last and not least, Peking University and Tsinghua University, where we are today, and we're so happy to be. We'd also like to thank the Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press, which is publishing all of these books and making them available to the world. That's wonderful. And I'd like to thank the great phalanx of volunteers that has organized this conference, all of you. If I've left anybody out, please forgive me. I haven't met all of you, but I will on Sunday night at a great farewell dinner. And of course, the biggest thank you of all has to go to the Fonds et Origo, the source, the main driving initiative of this, which is, of course, Professor Li Fuyin. Thomas, thank you for... So, today we're going to talk about grammar. Yesterday we began talking about grammar, and I put forward a notion about language that will be generally familiar to you from cognitive linguistics. One way of thinking of language is as a system of prompts for integrating constructions, for integrating meanings, for putting together mental networks on the basis of relational structures of form-meaning pairs. You've seen some great work in that from Professors Herarts and Christensen during this series of lectures. Now, since the conceptual structures to be integrated are many, each with ranges of words attached to them, an expression that prompts for appropriate integration has to combine words, and language has to have forms to make these combinations possible. There's some obvious examples. The beach is safe. I'm asking you to combine some things. But as we have seen, I am not asking you in language to compose meanings that are carried by the words. Almost all of the meaning is not encoded in the words. Languages underspecify very seriously the meaning that you have to put forward, as we saw just in order to make sense of the word safe. It is not the case that safe carries one meaning that we predicate of the head noun. Not at all. There are other sorts of things like compounding, likely story, possible solution, eligible bachelor, fake gun, but also red ball and brown cow. They're all of the same sort. So I'm going to be suggesting here, as I did yesterday, that we view language as a relational system of form-meaning pairs, that is, constructions, that themselves integrate for the purpose of prompting for the construction of conceptual integration networks. And as we discussed yesterday, the reason we can have form-meaning pairs is because we have conceptual integration, double-scope conceptual integration ability. And those form-meaning pairs can then be combined because we have integrative capabilities. And those integrations perform constructs that prompt us to build conceptual integration networks. So it's a feedback loop here in some ways. That is, advanced conceptual integration makes it possible to have language, but language prompts us to more, it is useful for prompting people to more conceptual integration. As we discussed, in keeping with other kinds of higher order cognitive behaviors, these things all feed each other: language, social cognition, and so on. Language is a complex dynamic system indeed, a notion you're familiar with from a lot of cognitive linguistics. Language indeed can be thought of to some extent as a complex adaptive system. I'll be coming at this from a slightly different direction, but compatible with many different branches of cognitive linguistics. The beginning place for looking at conceptual integration and its relation to grammar is The Way We Think, Conceptual Blending in the Mind's Hidden Complexities, which I wrote with Gilles Fauconnier. Go to blending.stanford.edu on the web, and all of your questions will be answered, I promise. There is a review of The Way We Think in Chinese by our own Li Fuyan, Thomas Li, in Contemporary Linguistics. Okay, complex grammatical structures that prompt for integrations. They are all that way, but we'll be looking at some of them. Why of networks, words like say, various kinds of things. So let's look at the first one. Why of networks like Anne is the boss of the daughter of Max. Now English, in a condition that is almost too good to be true, gives us a grammatical structure whose purpose is to prompt for just the kinds of integrations that we have been looking at. And here's something I'll say a couple of more times because it might take a little bit of getting used to. The meanings that we will be integrating do not integrate compositionally. On the contrary, compositionality is not an appropriate view of the way in which we construct complex meanings. There is selective projection, there is emergent structure that is not contained in the meanings that we are composing. However, the forms, these little forms, these tools that we use to prompt people to do integrations, sometimes are, as forms, compositional. You can combine the forms sometimes compositionally to an extent. And form and meaning are so tightly related. Remember, we've talked many times about compressions to the blend. Compressions to the blend. And one of the things we do all the time is compress the form and the meaning, even though that's an outer space relationship. So we look at a little form on the blackboard and we say, oh, this means Tsinghua University, right? No, it's just a form. The meaning is something else, but we think the form and we collapse the form and the meaning. You know, I show you a picture of my son. It's 2 inches square, right? And it's just a picture of his head, and I say, this is my son, right? Okay, the form, the representation is collapsed with the meaning. We're not deluded, but sometimes it's easy to fail to separate form and meaning because, of course, to be native speakers of language, what we must do is compress and collapse them all the time. So what you're hearing right now is just a bunch of sounds. The gestures you're seeing are just some photons striking your retina. But it feels as if you're hearing meaning. In fact, it feels as if I'm taking my meaning and sticking it right in your brain as if you're doing no work. But on the contrary, you're in the presence of forms. And you have to do a fabulous amount of backstage cognition in order to get meaning out of that. But it doesn't seem like anything because you're advanced double-scoping, cognitively modern human beings. Okay, so here we go. When you get a why of construction in English, it's just 2 words, right? But this is what you know you're supposed to do. A why of construction says, hey, I have a big job for you, and I want you to do it really fast, and I want you not even to notice that you're doing it. And I want you to use advanced double-scope cognition, which is no problem at all because that's what you do all the time. So you have to call up an input space for the relational frame that contains the why. That is, there's going to be the word why is going to prompt some frame. It could prompt more than one, in which case this could be ambiguous in a number of ways. But you have to come up with some frame that plausibly can be called for when I say why. You know you're supposed to construct a blended space, but you don't know what it is yet. You're supposed to project the element y from the frame to create an element y prime in the blend. We'll go over this in a minute if it gets confusing. You're supposed to come up with a w that is not mentioned at all. It's not in the language at all, but you have to come up with a w in the input space that will bear some appropriate relationship to the y. You have to project the w to create an element y prime in the blend. You have to project the y-w relationship onto the y prime w prime in the blended space selectively. you have to provide open-end connectors from Y prime to W prime in the blend. We expect these connectors to make connections at some point, but it's just hanging. And we expect the open-ended connector from W prime in the blend to connect to something picked out by the noun phrase that will follow of. Now, none of that is encoded in the language. We just say Y of, and that's what you do. You know this is what you're supposed to do. Here's some examples. Paul is the father of Sally. So, father of. You have to do all the stuff that I mentioned. Now, in this case, the missing W is daughter. That's not so hard because father is, you know, a two-part term already. Where there's a father, there's a child, right? But notice it's not mentioned and it doesn't have to be. You find the W and you project the YW into a YW prime, and it's supposed to be compressed with Paul and Sally. So now in the blend, Paul is the father of Sally. But you can, you can also say necessity is the mother of invention. These are very different things. This feels highly metaphoric. But the Y of construction is prompting you to do the same mental work. You hear that, and you know you're supposed to do a blend. Tsinghua University is the MIT of China, right? No problem. Everybody gets it immediately, right? So the W for MIT is the United States, right? Didn't have to mention it. You have to go find it. Sometimes it's not so easy to find the W, but you know you're supposed to find one, and you do find one. It doesn't have to be mentioned at all. I don't even have to say what is supposed to be projection from Tsinghua University and China and MIT in the United States into the blend. You do all that work. I'm just saying to you, you go do all that work, and you do all that work, and it seems to you as if this form has meaning, which it doesn't, and the meaning is just what you constructed. Instead, it's just a little tiny thing with a few little prompts and a little construction. You do all the work, boom. And you don't even see it. It's like you look at the world, it doesn't seem as if you're doing anything. How do you see easy? You open your eyes and see. It's the same thing you think with language. Why does this mean this? Well, what else could it mean? Okay, this is the top of the building. Shakespeare says every minute now should be the father of some stratagem. It means we should think up a lot of cunning plans all the time. I have a cunning plan. Zeus is the father of Athena. Joseph is the father of Jesus. I'm your father for today. This is a sentence I heard. In the United States, we have take your daughter to work day. And what you do is you take your daughter to work with you so your daughter can see work. But sometimes fathers travel or they're not around for some other reason. So one of the things that may happen is a friend of the family or an uncle or a neighbor or something like that will take the daughter with them. And one of these people said to a 7-year-old girl, no problem, I'm your father for today. And nobody was confused. Everybody knew what was supposed to be projected from what frames, right? Good. A Y of construction. You are my long-lost daughter. So there's a man who has a daughter, and she dies at age 10. And he's very sad, but a couple years after he had this daughter, he has another daughter, Sally, and he's been traumatized by the death of his daughter, and he's fairly cold and not so receptive to Sally. But as time goes on, Sally gets to be 12, 14, and he realizes that Sally is now at an age that his previous daughter never reached. And he begins to contemplate life and what this means. And he begins to behave much more warmly and receptively to Sally. And she says, you know, what's going on, Dad? What's happened? And he says, you are my long-lost daughter. And this is particularly powerful and poignant. Now, of course, she's been his daughter all along. This is the equivalent of, you are the long-lost daughter of me. This is an of construction. There are other constructions that are related to it and do a similar kind of thing. He was the Einstein of the 5th century. The adjective is the banana peel of the parts of speech because you can strip it off. The missing W is banana. Roles like valet of the Secretary of the President. See, these things can compose. The wife of the Secretary of the President is the most important position in the government. Fear is the father of violence. Language is the fossil poetry of the soul. Las Vegas is the American Monte Carlo. Washington, D.C. is the American Beijing. I made that one up. So, I mean, you make up these things all the time. Just listen and you'll hear hundreds of them in any day. Social movements, this is a quote, are at once the symptoms and the instruments of progress. As poetry is the harmony of words, so conversation is the harmony of minds. Charles Fillmore gives the example, one needn't throw out the baby of personal morality with the bathwater of traditional religion. And notice, of course, the counterparts in this needn't be metaphoric at all. The nation of England, the island of Koh-Phi-Phi, the stigma of cowardice, the feature of decompositionality, the condition of despair. So what's happening? Well, Y of says, call up an input space, a mental space of meaning that can plausibly be prompted for by Y. You're going to have to find a W. It's not going to be mentioned. You have to project this into counterparts selectively into the blend with open-end connectors. You don't know what they're going to connect to. However, if I say Paul is the father of Sally, then Paul and Sally, X and Z, X is the Y of Z, right? Paul is the father of Sally. That conceptual array is projected selectively in here. So now in the blend, Paul is the father of Sally. And as we discussed, you do have a new role, father of Sally. It can be interesting in various social ways. So you could say, well, he's Sally's father this year because, 2 years ago the mother was married to somebody else. Now she's married to this one. And this can have social ontology, social consequences. Now he's responsible for her college tuition. Now he has to pay her parking tickets. Now, right? This role is important. Okay, composition. Why expressions themselves can be composed. The forms can be composed. What follows the of in the first Y expression can be another Y expression for as long as we like. We can say the doctor of the sister of the boss of Hieronymus Bosch, right? You use this and nobody has any trouble. You have to do a cascade of blends with open connectors, and you don't know what the connection is going to be until the end, and there are lots of missing W's. No problem for you. Generally, the Y of, the Y1 of the Y2 of the Y3 of the Y4 of, okay? Because they have open-ended connectors, these operations can be repeated. So an open-ended connector of one Y network can attach not to just one element, but to another Y of network. So you can compose these networks, and repeating the expression just asks us to repeat the mapping operations. Now, don't confuse this with the meaning. Putting together the meaning is a highly creative act, even though it doesn't seem like anything. The meanings are not just composing in a cut and paste way. So here's the Y of squared network. This is like the father of the boss of, right? So let's look at this. And this is sort of, the valet of, the secretary of, the president of. No problem. Okay? And then you can tie them up. So let's look at one. Anne is the boss of the daughter of Max. Okay? Notice it has the same form, and you're supposed to do the same kind of work over radically different meaning. Prayer is the echo of the darkness of the soul. Very poetic. What could that mean? I'm not so sure. But I can give you interpretations. But the form prompting you to do a conceptual integration network is the same. Anne is the boss of the daughter of Max. Poetry is the echo of the darkness of the soul. And it goes like this. Prayer is the echo of the darkness of the soul. Although maybe I like poetry better. Prayer is the echo of the darkness of the soul. And then we tend to complete it into one big compressed conceptual integration network. So these things are all over here. Now notice they're missing W's, right, that are not mentioned. Doesn't matter, you found them. So for instance, an echo, the missing W people usually find is the echo of a sound, right? Okay. But notice it's the same system in Anne is the boss of the daughter of Max. So an XYZ is a single syntactic grammatical form. It's related to others, of course, because you don't always have to use the word of. You can use a genitive pronoun and so on, but you get the generalization. The construction is we have this apparently harmless but actually immensely powerful XYZ construction. So we can say necessity is the mother of invention and so on, and the understander understands what you're supposed to do. If you're a native speaker of English and you don't understand all that conceptual work that you're supposed to do when you're prompted in this way, you just don't count as a native speaker of English, or people think there's some kind of problem. But now, quite interestingly, the same form, the same set of prompts can work over essentially over any conceptual domain. So here's a very unusual. Paul is the father of Sally has the very same syntactic form as vanity is the quicksand of reason, which may be unintelligible. Vanity is the quicksand of reason. We'll talk about that just a little. And it maps the kinship subframe father ego onto the two people, Paul and Sally. Okay? So let's have a look in a second at vanity is the quicksand of reason. Now, this grammatical form works over the full range of conceptual integration networks. Conceptual integration is an operation that operates over all meaning. There are a few particular kinds of networks that I've picked out, but they're only particular, and they can combine and so on. But X is the Y of Z can now be used across simplex and mirror and frame compatible and single scopes and double scopes, no problem. It's a general form, a little form that I can use to prompt for vastly more complicated construction of conceptual integration networks. So let's look at vanity as the quicksand of reason. Now, in one space, it's just like this is just like Anna's the boss of the daughter of Max, right? In one space, you have some kind of frame that can be prompted for by my using the word vanity. There might be many of them. It's your job to find one as you try to put together this integration network. But one obvious one is you have human traits like reason and vanity. Especially when you get the reason, you know X is the Y of Z, that the X and the Z are going to go into a similar kind of frame. So you need a frame that's got vanity and reason in it. And when you get the vanity is the quicksand of, you know, the Z's coming, right? And the other one, quicksand, that could call up a lot of frames. But a standard one is traveling and falling into the quicksand, okay? Because people get trapped in quicksand and Lawrence of Arabia and things like that. Now, this doesn't depend on truth. So, for instance, I come from deserts, and I know that you don't have quicksand without water. That's what quicksand is. It's a combination of sand and water, and that's why you fall into it. But in movies like Lawrence of Arabia, you can have people falling into quicksand in the driest parts of the desert where there's couldn't possibly be any water, right? And you have both of these frames. One is legendary, the other could be real. It doesn't matter. You know them. It doesn't matter whether they're true or useful or imaginative. You have to call it up. So one you can call up is a quicksand frame, and you say, aha, the missing element is going to be, the missing W is going to be a traveler. Notice it's not mentioned. Vanity is the quicksand of reason, right? And then you know what you're supposed to do is to take the quicksand traveler relation and selectively project it down into the blend so it's going to be blended with vanity and reason. So one very standard interpretation of this is if you're vain, if you have a big ego, then that is going to stop your reason from working well. And you might have to recruit an entire other conceptual integration network you have, huge complex of them, in fact, brilliantly studied by Eve Sweetser and from etymology to pragmatics, namely the mind is a body moving in space. So reason makes progress, I'm advancing toward the solution, and so on. That's another conceptual integration network that we know and is entrenched, and it can come in here. So the story here that you can get is that if you are vain, your reason is not going to work very well. Now, there are fabulous oppositions and conflicts between the vanity-reason frame and relation and the quicksand traveler frame. The projection is very selective, and you have to put together a blend that in fact takes parts of each frame and turns them into a new frame. And if you want to see at a length of 15, 20 pages in print on the conflicts and how much work you have to do to get to this simple meaning that I just blurted out and that everybody follows, you can have a look at an article of mine called The Literal and Non-Literal Distinction, or you can look in a chapter called Figure from a book I contributed to. Both of these are available from my website, markturner.org. Okay? Now, does this mean, oh, I see, conceptual integration just lets us do anything? We just throw things together. No. As you have seen, there's a set of constitutive principles, otherwise it's not a successful network, and there is a set of governing principles like topology, web, good reason, and on and on and on. And these constrain the work you can do. But conceptual integration is not algorithmic. So let's just give a little example. I have an entire lecture which I call Bad Blends, where I put up example after example after example that everybody finds confusing, and they just don't make any sense to folks, or they don't like them. And I say, this is a blend, but the reason it's no good for you is it's violating this or that other constraint. So for instance, it's decompressing something that's already compressed for no benefit of recompression, or it's violating the topology that you need in order to solve for the inputs and so on. But let's just look at this one. Take something like bacteria, right? I've said vanity is the quicksand of reason, and I've sort of slipped under the rug there that you have to get a missing W, namely the traveler, and off you went to get it, right? Well, how about if you just, you want to find something else? Maybe how about bacteria, right? Maybe bacteria is the missing W. And you say, okay, I'm going to blend vanity and reason to quickstand and bacteria. Yeah? What? Most people just don't see what that could mean, right? Well, one constraint is the missing W has to be available from the frame you called up. If it's not, you're not going to map it in, right? But what's available depends upon the situation you're in and activation. What's active in the mind? So let me give you an example here. If I say, did you know that some bacteria can live only in quicksand? And they depend on it for everything. Okay, well now you have an idea of biological things and habitat. There's some things that can live only certain places. Torrey pines can live only in a certain part of Southern California, right? There's a habitat. They can only live there. So there's a certain kind of bacteria, I'm telling you. This is false. Or maybe it's false. I wouldn't have the slightest idea. But suppose you read this. There's a certain kind of bacteria that can live only in quicksand, and it depends on it for everything. Otherwise, it dies. For them, quicksand is not a trap. It is what they need to live at all. Well, for some people, vanity is the quicksand of reason. Their vanity gives them the self-confidence to think well. If they're not being vain, then they're not confident, and they just don't have any confidence, and they're intimidated, and so they can't reason well. Well, now, in this, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but it's nothing like before. Now, because I have made bacteria and quicksand by a kind of conceptual integration, here's organisms and habitat, here's a habitat, right? So the quicksand is the habitat. It's a simplex framing now. Fine, simplex blend, which we call framing. Well, great. Now I've got a frame in which I've got quicksand and the bacteria. So when I say vanity is the quicksand of reason, it's easy for you now to find the missing W. So it's not at all willy-nilly. But on the other hand, what you can make X is the Y of Z constructions do is very wide open depending upon the meanings that you can make active. Okay, now this is not so unusual, the idea that a given form can prompt for lots and lots and lots of different meanings. I did this yesterday with brown cow. Remember, I went through the vast range of things that you could mean by saying my cow is brown, right? Vast. Now take something like, this is a more elaborate grammatical construction. If I were you, I would quit my job. I mean, this is a construct. it's already a unification of a lot of different constructions. All these words, the subjunctive form of the verb and the counterfactual condition for the first part of the if-then combination, the use of the conditional on would. Lots and lots of different constructions have to combine in order to make this construct. This is a standard line of construction grammar. Now, it might seem to express a unique blend, but it can prompt for many different blends depending on the selective projection and the emergent structure. So I only need this little bit of grammar to get you going on things, as you can see by how I could follow it, and maybe I don't have to follow it at all with these kinds of things because we're already in the situation we've been talking. If I were you, I'd quit my job, but I am independently wealthy. You shouldn't quit by any means. But I am a hothead and would regret it later and would have to go on my knees begging for my job back. Now notice who's actually quitting the job, me or you, is different as we go through these blends. And is it wise or is it not? And what's the reason? And what are the consequences? Lots of different meaning, all out of if I were you, I'd quit my job. If I were you, I'd quit my job and so should you. If I were you, I'd quit my job, but you shouldn't, right? If I were you, I'd quit my job, but that's only because the boss needs me so much he'd offer me a raise to get me back. If I were you, I'd quit my job since I couldn't live with myself knowing how badly I had treated me. What? Wait, that doesn't seem to be grammatical. Imagine this is being said by somebody to his boss. And they're disagreeing. And the worker says to the boss, if I were you, I'd quit my job because I couldn't live with myself knowing how badly I'd treated me. That's fine, because the myself is in the blend the boss. The combination, it's now the boss with the psychological understanding of the worker. But the person who's been treated badly is the me, right? So you know where the myself goes and you know where the me goes, right? If I were you, I'd quit my job because being you would make me so utterly miserable I couldn't possibly get any work done, right? If I were you, I'd quit my job since I would have a wealthy father. In that case, the addressee is the one that has the wealth. Whereas up there at the beginning, but I am independently wealthy, you shouldn't quit by any means, I was the one with the wealth, and very different meaning in the blend. If I were you, I'd quit my job since you have another job offer. If I were you, I'd quit my job since I have another job offer. In this one, you're the one who should quit your job in the blend. In this one, I'm the one who should quit my job in the blend if I had the conditions of your employment. If I were you, I'd quit my job since your beloved boss has another job offer and will be leaving soon. It goes on and on and on. Now, this doesn't mean by any means that it's willy-nilly. Oh, I see, I can just integrate anything. No. On the contrary, the constraints are very severe. But the meaning is not algorithmically put together in a compositional way from these little constructions. Words don't mean. Words don't have meaning. Words are prompts that we use to call up mental work, to get us to use basic mental operations we already have to work on things that for the most part we already know. So in any theory of meaning, this is from the way we think, activation does not come for free. The existence of frames, knowledge, experience, scenarios, and memories does not come for free. Ease of activation and degree of entrenchment by themselves impose very strong constraints on the imagination and the use of language. Linguists, logicians, and for the most part, even psychologists tend to focus on the entrenched cases. The view is, oh, we have to get the simple stuff first, the very simple stuff, like brown cow, or red ball, or the cat is on the mat. And don't bother me with, prayer is the echo of the darkness of the soul, or language is fossil poetry, or I'm your father for today. We'll get to that in 10 years from now. We'll get to that in 100 years from now. We'll get to that in 3 millennia from now. We'll never get to that, right? But that's the wrong way to go at it, because children do this from the get-go. They do not build up from very simple grammar that doesn't have any complexity in it. On the contrary, they're building complexity from day one, and they're certainly building mental complexity, and we have to take that on board. It might be simpler I don't think it would be, but in principle, you could think it would be simpler to start with the so-called easy stuff first, except that the easy stuff is not easy. In order to do something like brown cow, you have to have double scope integration going full bore just to understand that the forms are integrated with the meaning. In order to understand a why of, you have to be going full bore with double scope integration, not just to do the conceptual integration, but also to understand how to put together constructions into a construct, right? You can't start just with the easy stuff as if it is limited when you're dealing with mind and language. So when we tend to start just with the entrenched cases, which are already built and usually pretty easy to activate, when those are the only ones we activate, then the meaning seems to us predictable from the forms, from the patterns used. That's a mistake. You can look in the way we think about the ways in which a word like house can be used. All of the simple words can be used in just these kinds of ways. And this is probably why linguists, logicians, and analytic philosophers of language have often incorrectly, seriously incorrectly, excluded the inventive, figurative, creative, socially shifting, and literary examples from their domain of inquiry. On the contrary, this mistaken view that that only predictable composition of meaning can be scientifically tractable and important, and that only predictable composition of meaning can support genuine rational thought is been very misleading. The problem is when you start with only those and look at only those examples. It's not just that you're missing what's going on in the obviously complex cases. You're missing what's going on in the very simple cases. You're blind to it. It takes a lot of work to see what's going on at all in the human brain. We're not built to look into it, and we need the benefit of these other kinds of examples to show us the general patterns. Okay, so we saw why of networks. You might have thought that, the most boring thing in the world is a why of network. In fact, it's a spectacular demonstration of the creativity of conceptual integration. We looked at words like safe, right? So I can say, if the child's in danger, if you think the child might get hurt out on the beach, I can say, oh, the beach is safe. Or I can say the child is safe. And I can mean the identical thing by saying those two sentences. So if you thought that safe somehow predicates a feature of the subject, that's wrong. Because if that's true, then predicating that feature of beach and predicating that feature of child should give us two quite different meanings. On the contrary, what you know is that you are supposed to call up the current scene with the beach and the child. You are supposed to make a counterfactual space in which you integrate the current scene with the frame of harm. So now something gets harmed over in that space over there. You're supposed to compress the counterfactual relationship into a feature for this space. So now this space is safe. It's not the case that we already conceived of it as safe. Now we're being asked to think of it as safe. It's a new feature. It's like saying, oh, we're lucky, right? That is, there's a new feature in our conception. You may think that you know what's in this room, but now I'm going to point out to you. Something, right? I am safe, right? Now, of course, you sort of knew I was safe before if you decided to think about it. But now I'm explicitly asking you to conceive of this situation as one in which there's an absence of harm to me. And you hadn't even been concerned with that before. Or if I say, I'm really lucky to be talking to such a great audience at Tsinghua University. Previously, we were just talking, right? And now I'm not any different, right? But if there's a counterfactual scene in which I'm not talking to people, or they're not interesting, or they're not attentive, or something like that, then I compress the counterfactual, and now in this scene, because I'm not in that scene, now I'm lucky, right? Okay. Simple words like accident, safe, in fact, brown, red, all of them, prompt for the construction of these integration networks, and we could go through the kind of complexity that you get just as we did why of. We did some of that already. Just to give you a little tip, suppose, for example, think of things like safe bet and things like, suppose there are some jewels. And I say, oh, the jewels are safe, right? what I mean is that what I might mean is that the owner is not going to be harmed by the destruction of the jewels, right? But suppose I ship them, and I say, oh, the packaging is safe. Now, I don't mean, or I don't have to mean, that the packaging isn't going to come into harm. Indeed, the packaging may get the hell beat out of it. What I can mean is the jewels won't get harmed, right? The packaging is safe because you know you're supposed to go to town and make a blend that involves a counterfactual and a feature here of absence of harm for something, and that's what a word like safe does for you. We've been through other things like fake gun, which is not a gun, of course. Coulson and Fauconnier have talked about that, as have many semanticians. Place the flowers in front of the missing chair. Well, we've been through that. There's a gap in the fence. So we've seen that. Now let's look at clausal construction, something like the cause-motion clausal construction. We saw the way in which the same clausal construction, noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, prepositional phrase, can prompt for an integration in which you use the frame of caused motion. An agent takes an object, performs an action on the object that causes the object to move in a direction, like throw, right? But I can use that to get you to compress all kinds of elaborately diffuse stuff into a compressed frame from which you can manage the whole network. And I don't need new language to do that, because when you project down from the inputs to the blend, the grammar comes with it, can come with it, and now you have language for the blend, which is why you don't need new language to express good ideas, good thing, and that solves the central problem of language. That's why you can say things like, Paul sneezed the napkin off the table. That's Del Goldberg's example. I threw the ball over the fence. But notice float, a word like float, that's not a caused motion verb like throw. But if I say he floated the boat to me, now you know that I'm asking you for a caused motion scene, right? And this can get quite elaborate. You know, I read my son to sleep, right? Where here, metaphorically, the state of sleep is a goal that can be obtained. And what did I do? I'm the causal agent. I did something. I read. What was the effect? The effect was there was an event. And that's motion in a direction to a goal. But in this case, the motion in a direction to a goal integrates with change of state, often called the event structure metaphor, change of state from one state to another. So you can read him to sleep. We've been through a lot of that. We can even say things like, we blocked him from the door. And now the grammar of the cause-motion construction says, cause up cause motion, call up cause motion. But I also want you to call up some frame that can be suggested by the word block. And I want you to integrate these. Now in the blend, notice what happens is we don't have an agent performs an action that causes an object to move in a direction. We have an agent performs an action that causes the object to stop moving in the direction that it was moving. No problem. This is a really double scope blend. In one, you've got motion of the object being caused. In the verb, you've got stoppage. And in the blend now, you've got a causal agent who performs an action that stops the motion of the agent. No problem for you. You're double scope blenders. And you know how to use these prompts that I give you to put together that kind of meaning. You don't have to say, wait a minute, I thought noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, prepositional phrase was caused motion. Where's the caused motion? I'm dumb. I can't do this. You're not a chimpanzee. You're not a bonobo. You are a double scoping, cognitively modern human being. This stuff is the easiest thing in the world for you. You're doing it all the time. It's not cognitively costly. It is the way we think. Okay, similarly for resultative clausal constructions like he boiled the pan dry. Notice he didn't boil. Kathy painted the wall white. That's a resultative. Noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, adjective. You know Kathy painted the wall white does not mean she painted the wall white, although she painted the wall because it was white. No. She painted the wall although it was white. No. she painted the wall because she was white. No. Right? But why not? How do you know? Because white's supposed to be the resultative for the result for the wall. You know that from the construction, this little prompt. Similarly, he boiled the pan dry. Notice he didn't boil, and he didn't boil the pan. What you know you're supposed to do is he performed an action. You don't, in this case, you don't know what the action is. Maybe he turned the knob and forgot it. Maybe he punched some buttons. You don't know what action he did. But that's okay because boil comes in from the event of the water. Notice the water's not even mentioned. And so the verb in the resultative construction can now take in the verb from the caused event action, no problem, and become, in the blend, a causal action. I'm going to boil this, right? Boiling is not an action I am doing. Boiling is an event that it is doing, but I can put it into I boiled it in a transitive, or in this case, into a resultative. She bled, and notice, I didn't boil, he didn't boil the pan, right? But he boiled the pan dry. It's fine. You know that what's supposed to happen here is that dry is somehow supposed to be a result for the pan as a result of an action he performed, right? Okay, she bled him dry. Hunk choked the life out of him. These are all cases in which grammatical constructions, form-meaning pairs, are able to exist because of double-scope conceptual integration. We are able to integrate them from constructions into constructs, that is, into actual expressions. Because we are integrators, we can take the prompt and know that it's asking us to put together a mental space network with conceptual integration, as in Anne is the boss of the daughter of Max, or Paul is the father of Sally. And we can manage the unpacked and diffuse network from the compressed human scale blend that can be referred to by the linguistic constructions. The ditransitive is similar. We talked about, Catherine, this is still relative. The ditransitive is similar, of course. Mary poured Bill some wine. Now, the classic frame for the ditransitive is transfer. Here you go. See? That's a ditransitive. I handed you the controller. May I have it back? Thank you. Right? Wait, you do this with little kids, by the way. If you ever need to entice a little kid, you just sit there and you say, would you like the ball? And the kid can barely sit up. And the kid takes the ball and you say, can I have it back? And they sort of have some doubt, but maybe they give it back. They'll do this with you for 45 minutes, handing the thing back and forth. It's a very basic human scene, ditransitive. Okay? Goldberg has studied this. A verb like hand, I handed him, where of course it comes from the noun phrase. It's a denominal verb. Now notice when I say Mary poured Bill some wine, because I've got noun phrase, verb phrase, noun phrase, it's a natural assumption for you to project from the ditransitive the reception of the wine, because that's what the ditransitive is mainly for. Notice I didn't say he got it. So I can, in fact, say Mary poured Bill some wine, but he didn't notice and left it sitting on the table. That's just fine. These things are defeasible. Okay? But you projected it right in. Same kind of thing. Paul handed her the book, and Adele Goldberg works on all of these. Right down to she refused him that courtesy. So again, what you can get is a frame that's meant for transfer and reception, but a verb that prompts for stoppage, denial, integrate them into a scene, and now what somebody does is perform an action that stops the reception of the object. She refused him that courtesy. She denied him the job, right? No problem. And here I'm going to talk about the elaborate ditransitive, okay? Now, one of the things that somebody in a ditransitive frame gets is often not just the object, but the benefit of receiving it. Okay? So if I hand you $1, you get, or I hand you 1,000 renminbi, you get not just the 1,000 renminbi, you get the benefit of having 1,000 renminbi, right? Now, this doesn't always work. When my son hands me a banana peel, I don't really get a benefit, but little kids hand you things, right? But one of the things that's not unusual is that you get not just the object, but also the benefit. So one of the ditransitives that we're familiar with is the one in which the projection is not of the object, but of the benefit of the action, right? So Goldberg's example is slay me a dragon, right? He slew me a dragon. The princess does not get the dragon. She gets the benefit of the dragons having been slain, right? And James Taylor, in a famous song, I'm going to inject your soul, well, with sweet rock and roll, shoot you through full of rhythm and blues, says to a member of the band, slide me a bass trombone. Now note, the reason I picked this one is you could slide somebody a bass trombone. You could slide it across the floor to him. That's not what he means. What he means is you're doing the sliding. You slide me a bass trombone, or I slid him a bass trombone. The slide comes in as the event action that you do, and what I get is not the bass trombone. What I get is the benefit of your having slid the bass trombone. No problem, you'll hear them everywhere. We also talked about the way nominal compounds are prompts to do integration, like boathouse and houseboat. Typically, the two nouns are not linked. They're not counterparts in the mapping. We talked about something like jailbait. It's the similar for, we went through all of these. Something like land yacht. This is an extremely common pattern. You take one noun from one space, one noun from the other space, and that's all that you need. Now, I picked this one because I think you're unlikely to know it. In fact, most people in the United States don't know what a land yacht is, but if you ask them, they can sort of figure it out. A land yacht is a car. It's a big car. It's a big car that wealthy people drive, and it's not very good at handling. It just sort of sways. Maybe there might be little opera windows in the back seat and plush leather. It's not sexy at all. It's very bureaucratic and important. It's a land yacht. Now, notice over here, notice that the land and the yacht are not counterparts. The counterpart of land is sea, and the counterpart of yacht is car. But what you get down here is something that you can refer to something that is driven on roads nowhere near the water and call up vast cultural meaning, and that's kind of insulting, right? This person wants to look prestigious. It's a land yacht. I want you to notice something else. Emergent syntax. There's a noun here and a noun here, and guess what? This is a noun too, or rather a noun phrase. I didn't invent a new grammatical category. The insides of noun phrase may change when we compose them, but I still have noun as a place in my forms. And any place that I can stick a noun, I can now stick the nominal compound for the most part, right? So I can make a construction that doesn't have to toss up the rest of the language. I can make a construction by emergent syntax. We talked about a little bit about derivative or blended syntax yesterday when we talked about the way that you can use risk. And so you can risk something to the waves, in which case you're calling in the exposure frame and the exposure syntax. You can risk your money in the stock market, in which case you're calling in the investing frame and the investing syntax, namely in, because you invest in. You expose to, but you invest in. You can say, I risked 1,000 renminbi on this racehorse, in which case you're calling in the betting frame because you bet on. So you get risk to, risk in, and risk on, emergent syntax. From the blending of the frames, the forms themselves can be combined into new syntactic forms. This can, in fact, be just like y of. This can be composed. So let's do this. Suppose I say Girl Scout. You probably have Girl Scouts in China because we have them everywhere. It's an organization. Girls get into it. They learn how to hike and things like that. We have Boy Scouts. We have Girl Scouts. Let's take Girl Scout. Now, girl is a noun, scout is a noun. Girl Scout is a noun in the sense that it can go the spots in the language that nouns can go. Now take ballet school. Well, school is a noun and ballet is a noun. That's a frame-compatible network because it's like fan of bicycle racing because you know people learn things in schools and ballet can be one of the things they learn, so the frame is subordinated and nests. Now take lace curtain. Those are two nouns and you get a nominal compound. But you could also say, and I'm just doing this to be funny, I could give you a very normal one and you'll see them anytime you look at computer magazines or something like that. I'll give you a funny one just so that you'll remember it. I could say, oh, she's a lace curtain ballet school Girl Scout. And what I might mean is that she comes from a certain social demographic and she gets a certain kinds of education and she's in a certain kind of organization. And you might even recognize this as a social stereotype if you're in certain parts. 6 nouns that go into 3 nominal compounds, where the last of the nominal compounds, Girl Scout, now takes the role sort of the head noun, and the other 2 drop into spots in the nominal, in compounding, right? They become modifiers. Okay, did jailbait. Adjectives like guilty pleasures, likely candidate, and red ball. Notice that a likely candidate is usually used to refer to somebody who's not a candidate. So you are not taking the meaning of the candidate and the meaning of likely and putting them together. On the contrary, you're taking candidate from one mental space and likely from a particular kind of frame. And now you know one thing you can do is make a frame in which what you have is someone who is likely to be a candidate. This is not strange. This is the normal way to refer to someone who is likely to be a candidate. You don't say there's somebody who is likely to become a candidate. You say that, well, one likely candidate is so-and-so. And you don't mean one likely candidate to get the job. You mean one person likely to be chosen as a candidate to run for the role. And let me be clear about that. A likely candidate is not yet a candidate. Okay? Similarly, guilty pleasures. Allow yourself these guilty pleasures. Chocolate is a guilty pleasure. Well, it's not the pleasure that's guilty. It's the person who has the pleasure who feels guilty. But now that relationship, which is a cause-effect outer space connection, is compressed into a feature of the pleasure. This happens all over the language, right? A guilty pleasure. Some grateful memories. The memories are not grateful. You're grateful to have those memories. You're grateful for the events of those memories. But now that intentional relationship between you and the memories is compressed into a feature of the memories in the brain. You're not confused. You know exactly how to do this. They're grateful memories. But it's just the same as we show in the book for red ball. Okay, likely candidate. Silver honeymoon, by the way. Does anybody in the room know what a silver honeymoon is? No. No? Nobody? Good. Well, you won't believe it when I tell you. There are these package tours in the United States where when you're 50 years old, or maybe 40, or maybe 30, or whatever you want. I mean, not when you're 50 years old. On your 50th wedding anniversary, the company will take you back to just the kind of environment you were when you were kids, where you met. So you see 70-year-old people in tennis shoes doing the sock hop at the high school dance or something like this, and they go out for a cheeseburger and fries, right? And maybe they're left alone in a car so they can neck the way they did when they were young. It's called a silver honeymoon, right? It's not really a honeymoon. That's a great thing. Okay. Morphological combinations in a single word. I'll do these quickly. This is this one down here. The tunnel that goes under the, what do you call that thing? The channel, the thing between England and France, is called by the English the Channel. It's the Channel Tunnel. Now, it just so happens that the morphology works out well in English for that point. In French, naturally, the English Channel is not called the English Channel. It is called La Manche. So there should be an in there, sorry. So that's Tunnel sous la Manche, right? So you can't do it in French. You can't make the same blend of form to indicate a blend of frames. Many of these formal blends and compressions depend upon not accidents of the language, but they depend upon what's already there. This is always the case. Somebody asks me, well, why don't we do verbs the way the French do? Well, one answer is they already have a system, and we're not going to rip it up by just wading in. And these things are what people who work in complex dynamic systems call path dependent. McJobs. McJobs is used for a vast variety of employment. It's sort of entry level, you don't get paid much, there's not a lot of respect for it, and there's no chance of advancement. So we'll say, oh, well, you know, the corporations in America are doing a terrible thing to the American workers. They're taking serious jobs and turning them into McJobs. And that's because of McDonald's and jobs. Now you get McJobs. I won't go through the other two. Okay, now for all of these cases, what we saw is that the construction in the language has a stable syntactic pattern. And that pattern prompts for a specific blending scheme. And the blending scheme carries with it a particular kind of compression. Okay, here comes some heavy-duty stuff. You can find the details, and the details are immense. In Blending as a Central Process of Grammar, Fauconnier and Turner, that's available from the Cognitive Science Network, or just go to my webpage. In French, sometimes you can use a single verb if it happens to exist for a kind of action. But there's another double verb construction, which is causative, where you use faire, which means to do. Pierre fait manger Paul. Now the causation of Paul goes into the faire, and the event that is caused and is done by Paul, who's the event agent, goes into manger. Pierre fait manger Paul, so Pierre feeds Paul. Pierre fait envoyer le paquet. Paul sent the package. He caused the sending of the package. And this is a transitive, this is a transfer, and this is an optional transfer. All of these, transitive, transfer, optional transfer. Pierre donne la soupe à Paul. So the optional is that you've got the a for the recipient. The soup is the object, and Paul is the agent of manger over here. Pierre fait manger la soupe à Paul. Okay, now Kimmer and Verhagen in 1994 said something quite brilliant. Analytic causative constructions can best be described as extensions of simpler kinds of expressions rather than as reductions for more complex underlying structures. I think this is exactly right. They said that there are cognitive models of causation based on force dynamics and interactions between participants. And these models relate to basic models, including transitive and ditransitive event structures, as we've seen. Gilles Fauconnier, and I think this view is exactly right, and that blending is the cognitive operation which allows the basic models to serve as inputs to the conceptual integration of more elaborate causal sequences, and in fact to give us these kinds of blended syntactic structures. So you get emergent syntax, essentially, of verb plus verb. It's extremely complicated, but you have one verb over here that's attached to the causation, and another verb, the causation that's done by the causal agent, and another verb over here that is attached to the event that is done by the agent of the event. And in the new causal construction, you get a verb from each of them. And you can get a double verb construction. And this is a case where the form just didn't have enough slots for the prompts that you needed to deliver for people to get the meaning that you wanted them to get, because there wasn't just a word that you could use. But that's okay. This is a general purpose construction. So what you have is there are three basic single verb constructions in English: the transitive, the transfer, and the optional transfer. And for each of them, what happens is there's a corresponding double verb construction. The double verb causative off the transfer. And that looks like this. So here's the transitive blend. Transitive first transfer, then optional transfer. So there's a causal agent in both of them. There's an event. Over here, there's an act and an event agent and an event. This is the agent who does the event. And the cross-space mapping is pretty clear. It's pretty easy to put together. And you have choices what you bring into the blend. But now what you bring into the blend is the causal agent, the act and the event and the object. And so you can get something like Pierre fait manger Paul, where Paul, who's the agent of the caused event, goes into the object slot, which was already available from the transitive construction. It's similar for the transfer and for the optional transfer. By the way, I should say, the syntax of this is an absolute nightmare, because where the clitic pronouns can go, where the reflexives can go, is immensely complicated. Lots of things you can say, lots of things you can't say. It feels completely systematic to French speakers. Now, building up from simpler structures is not a theoretical approach available to generative or relational theories of linguistics. And so the exceptional amount of machinery you have to bring in order to try to solve or explain something like French double verb or analytic causatives is immense. We think that this is a much more straightforward account, and moreover, you have to acknowledge that double scope blending works this way, whether you're looking at syntax or not. It's already clear from many, many other domains that this works and human beings can do this, right? We don't have to fire up an additional kind of machinery that's exclusive just to language in order to account for the emergence of complex syntactic patterns out of simpler patterns. Last one I'll give is Mandelbit's Binyan blends. That is, there's a set of patterns in Hebrew where you have a prefix and a set of vowels, okay? And one of those was called a binyan. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't speak Hebrew. And the plural is binyanim. Now, there are consonants that carry basic meanings. That's a compression, right? They prompt for. So what you do is you put the vowels onto the consonant rack, as it were. And this gives you different meanings or different patterns for a particular verb, right? This is a case where the blending, the syntactic blending, can be morphological because Hebrew happens to have a morphological causative. In other words, I'll show this to you right here. These are the 5 binyanim, the 5 different vowel plus prefix patterns. So a given verb, when you take a given set of consonants and slot them in, it can mean to see, to be seen, to seem, to show, to be shown, or to see each other, depending upon which of the binyanim it goes into. So you combine these things and you get a meaning out of it. Okay. So there is a morphological causative in Hebrew. And when it's combined with this consonant structure, which means sort of run, it means cause to run. So now you don't have to have a double verb construction the way you have in French, faire courir. You can say however you pronounce this, courir, right? And that means cause to run. So you can have things like this. The commander made the soldiers run, where the soldiers go into the direct object. And made to run can be a single verb because there's a morphological causative that can come into the form of the verb. Okay, so what I want to say is I was asked yesterday about universal grammar. But wait a minute, what happened to universal grammar? Are we all supposed to have this universal grammar? And I refer you to this 2002 article by Hauser, Chomsky, and Fitch, in which they argue that you have to have a lot of capacities for language. Are there any capacities that belong only to language? And their assertion is that the thing that belongs only to language is recursion. And it's the only uniquely human component of the faculty of language. All the others are had by other species. And so we further argue that the faculty of language in the narrow sense may have evolved for reasons other than language. So in fact, even recursion might not be specific to language. Hence, comparative studies might look for evidence of such computations outside the domains of communication. Okay? Well, this caused a firestorm. In cognitive linguistics, or the ancestors of cognitive linguistics, there's been an awful lot of work on syntactic combination, amalgams, and recursion. Of course, recursion is conceptual. We've seen that. I don't understand why we would say this is only in syntax. There's the mother of Paul, the mother of the mother of Paul. I'm not talking about language now. I'm talking about meaning. The mother of Paul. Aquinas believes, Augustine believes, Ambrose believes, Paul believes, Jesus believes. This is recursive in the sense that the output of the operation is the input to the operation. It's recursive. It happens. We have conceptually, the film. Which film? The one that was panned by the reviewer. That means criticized. Which reviewer? The one who was kissed by the actress. Which actress? The one who was escorted by the director. Which director? The one who was insulted by the reviewer. We do this kind of recursion. The output is the input to the output of the operation is the input to the operation. And of course, this happens in blending, as we've seen all the way along, and it happens in grammatical construction. So, mother of the mother of the mother of Paul. No, I'm talking about words here now. I'm talking about syntax. Aquinas believes, Augustine believes, Ambrose believes, Paul believes, Jesus believes. Lace-stocking Girl Scout Ballet School, which is different from lace-stocking Ballet School Girl Scout, right? But these nominal things can be recursive. And now the film that was panned by the reviewer, who was kissed by the actress, who was escorted by the director, who was insulted by the reviewer. Of course you get recursion in grammar. The reason you get recursion in grammar is because you get recursion in cognition. And the way you get it is by conceptual blending. So is there a universal grammar? Well, sure there is. I would never say that conceptual blending is universal grammar. I would never, ever, ever, ever say that. For starters, it's not conceptual blending, it's the operation. All human beings are equipped with this operation. It's not particular blends that are universal grammar, it's the operation. And of course, it's only part of, because there's a ton of other things, like attention. Lynn Talmy is now writing his big book on attention. Lots of things. Memory, right? Lots of things that you have to have in order to have grammar. You certainly have to have conceptual blending, but you have to have lots of things too. So the operation of conceptual blending is only part of a non-uniquely linguistic universal grammar. Thank you very much.